The desert stretched wide and bleached beneath a tired sun, a land too stubborn to forget its own silence. The sky, thin and white as bone, hung above Arizona's southern edge like the lid of a coffin. Nothing moved but the wind, scraping along dry riverbeds and through the brittle stalks of yucca. The earth had cracked in its thirst, and the rocks sat sun-baked and motionless, as if waiting for something long overdue. Elias Boone rode through it like a memory. His horse, a soot-colored Mustang with slow eyes, bore the miles without complaint, the kind bred for quiet and endurance. Elias himself moved little in the saddle. The brim of his hat shaded eyes that had seen too far in too many directions. His coat was dust-scoured, leather cracked at the seams. A rifle slung across his back swayed slightly with the rhythm of his riding, and a satchel of crumpled, wanted posters tapped against his side, unread. He did not ride fast. There was no need. The land had its own clock, and he had long since learned to match it. Just past midday, with the heat rising in waves off the earth, Elias reached a forgotten way station, half a building really, leaning into a cluster of stones as though trying to crawl back into the ground. The roof was sagging, held up by weather-stripped beams. An old sign swung on a rusted hinge above the door, letters faded to ghost sounds. A single well stood out front, circled by scorched grass and silence. And beside the well she sat. She wasn't moving, not quite. More like she had been placed there and left, like a piece of driftwood washed up after a fire. Her dress was the color of old linen, once white maybe, and torn through at the seams. Dust clung to her like a second skin. The veil, long and stained, had caught on the sagebrush nearby, trailing behind her like some torn banner. Bare feet tucked beneath her, head bowed, hands clasped as if in prayer or defeat. Elias stopped his horse. The wind lifted slightly, tugging at the veil, stirring the fabric of her dress. She didn't look up. He dismounted without a word. His boots pressed into the dust, leaving behind marks that would vanish in minutes. From the saddle, he unhooked a battered canteen and walked toward her, his steps unhurried, his shadow stretching ahead of him like a question. When he reached the well, he didn't ask what happened, didn't ask who she was or what she was doing in the middle of nowhere, in a ruined bridal dress. He simply unscrewed the canteen and held it out. Her hands moved slowly, like someone waking from underwater. She took the canteen, eyes still downcast. Small hands, trembling, freckled, pale beneath the grime. She drank without sound, water trickling down her chin and soaking into the bodice of the dress. When she finished, she handed it back and finally raised her eyes. They were green, sharp, but dimmed, like broken glass in a riverbed. She didn't say thank you, neither did he expect it. Behind them, the Mustang shook its mane and huffed, unsettling the silence. Elias turned slightly, looking at the door to the station house. It hung half open, the inside as dark as a cave. A swarm of flies buzzed somewhere near the eaves. He looked back at her. "Anyone else here?" he asked, his voice flat and low, like gravel sliding over metal. She shook her head. Not a word, just a gesture. He nodded once, then walked to the door and pushed it open the rest of the way. Inside, the air was thick with rot and heat. An old cot, some broken crates, and in the far corner, a wedding bouquet crushed and already curling at the edges. Flies circled it like mourners. He didn't go further in. Outside, she had begun to braid her hair, long strands, dirt-smudged but carefully gathered. Her hands worked with unconscious rhythm, something practiced. A routine, maybe, or the last thread of normalcy she had left. Elias returned to his horse. From one of the saddlebags, he pulled out a small tin of beans, a strip of jerky, and 2 metal cups. He knelt in the dust near her and set them down, striking a match to the dry twigs piled near the well. Flame caught quickly in the heat. He didn't invite her to eat, didn't need to. She inched closer when the scent reached her, close enough to share the fire, not quite close enough to share the silence. They ate slowly. When the beans were gone and the light began to dip westward, she spoke for the first time. "June," she said. The name hung between them like a feather drifting down a well. Elias nodded again as if she'd just handed him a map. "Elias," he replied, without looking at her. They said nothing else. When the last of the fire flickered out and the sky turned a shade of bruised purple, Elias unrolled his bedroll beside the stones and handed her his coat. She didn't take it at first, but he let it rest on the ground between them, and in time, she drew it around her shoulders. The wind picked up slightly as the stars pushed through the dusk. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, not a threat, just a reminder that the world kept moving, and beneath that vast cathedral sky, the bounty hunter and the discarded bride sat side by side, saying nothing, doing nothing, letting the desert take them in. The days that followed passed like smoke across an old mirror, slow, formless, and unwilling to be held. Elias and June traveled westward, deeper into the dry heart, where roads became guesswork and maps faded to lies. The land unfolded in silence, pale hills slouching beneath endless sky, rivers that had forgotten their own names, ghost wind blowing through sun-bleached cattle bones. Each morning, Elias saddled the Mustang. Each evening, June gathered twigs and watched the fire curl upward like a question no one dared ask. She rode behind him, her arms never wrapped around his waist, her eyes fixed not on the path ahead but on the path behind, as if watching for something that might come crawling out of yesterday. The wedding dress, though torn and darkened by dust, remained. She'd cut the hem with his knife, made it travel-worthy. The veil she folded carefully one morning and buried beneath a creosote bush without a word. Elias saw her do it and said nothing. They spoke rarely, as if each word cost something that couldn't be replaced. But she watched him. She watched how he moved when they reached a stream, slow, precise, like a man who expected snakes in every shadow. She watched how he touched his rifle, not like a weapon, but like an old friend. She watched how he looked at towns from a distance, scanning rooftops and smoke trails before stepping closer. And when they did enter town, briefly, always briefly, how he never drank more than 1 cup of coffee, never lingered, never turned his back to a door. In one such town, a place called Hollow Creek, they stopped for provisions. Wooden storefronts leaned like tired old men. A single dog slept on the steps of the sheriff's office. Elias bought dried beans, a coil of rope, a tin of lard, and a comb. He set the comb down beside her on the edge of the wooden stoop as they left town. She ran it through her hair that night by firelight. Slow strokes that caught in the knots and burrs. The sound was soft, like wind rustling paper. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. Instead, she said, "He used to do that." Elias turned slightly toward her. The fire reflected in his eyes, but he said nothing. "Comb my hair," she added, as if the memory had spoken on its own. Said it made me quiet. The flames cracked between them. Far off, an owl called into the stillness. She looked at the comb in her lap, then up at the stars. Her voice was thin but steady. Not everything starts out cruel. Elias picked up a stick and stirred the embers. After a long silence, he said, "Doesn't always end that way either." It wasn't comfort, just a fact placed gently between two people. On the third morning, a storm rolled in from the south, wind and grit, and a sky too heavy to breathe. They found shelter in an abandoned ranch house. The roof sagged but held. Rain came slow at first, then harder, pounding the shingles like hoofbeats. They lit a lantern and sat near the hearth, though the fireplace had long gone cold. June explored the house like a ghost, searching for something she'd forgotten. In one room, she found a broken mirror. She looked into it briefly before turning it face down. In another, she opened a drawer and pulled out a folded child's dress. She held it for a long time, then placed it gently back. Elias watched her sitting near the hearth, polishing his rifle with a rag already blackened by time. When the storm passed, the world outside had changed. The dust was damp, the air sharp with petrichor. It smelled almost clean. That evening, June stitched a tear in her dress using black thread and a needle from Elias's kit. She sat cross-legged, head bowed, fingers moving with surgical precision. "You sew," Elias said, not quite a question. "Used to," she replied. "For the girls at the mission?" He nodded slowly. After a moment she added, "They'd bring dolls with no faces. I gave them eyes." Something in the way she said it made Elias glance toward her, but she was focused on the thread. On the 5th day, they passed a church sunken into the earth, its steeple cracked and leaning eastward. A single bell hung above it, unmoving. June asked him to stop. She stepped off the horse without waiting for him to help. Dust trailed behind her as she walked to the church doors. They creaked open under her hand. Inside, the pews were covered in sand. A broken cross lay face down near the altar. Glass from the stained windows littered the floor like forgotten stars. She stood there a long time. When she returned, she carried a single page from a hymnal. No words on it. Just a drawing, a sparrow perched on a thorn branch. Elias didn't ask why. He simply made room for her in the saddle again. That night, as coyotes circled the ridge above their camp, June spoke again. Her voice was clearer now, less like wind through reeds. "There was a garden. In the house I left." She paused. "Lilies, white ones, and a stone fountain where the birds would drink. Every morning he'd leave a cup of water there. Not for them, for me. So I'd see it and know he was watching." Elias didn't interrupt. "I thought I was special," she said. "Turns out I was just the only one who didn't run." Her eyes were dry, her hands folded in her lap. Elias reached into his satchel and took out one of the wanted posters. He unfolded it and stared at the face. Rough sketch of a man, scarred jaw, bounty inked beneath in faded red. Slowly, he tore it in two and let the pieces drift into the fire. She didn't ask who it was. He didn't tell her. They sat in silence long into the night. The fire burned low, the stars turned overhead, and somewhere in the quiet, not from words, but from something older, deeper, a kind of recognition passed between them, like two people who've seen the same storm and carry its silence inside them. Sundown Ridge rose from the earth like a wound that never closed, not quite a town anymore, more like a cluster of bones. Wooden storefronts slumped into the dust. Windows shuttered against memory. A dry wind slithered through the alleys, kicking up scraps of paper and brittle leaves. The church bell no longer rang. The rail line had long since rusted over, and yet people remained, just enough to keep the dust from claiming everything. Elias and June rode in at dusk. The light was the color of rusted copper, sharp and low, stretching their shadows long across the road. They passed a crooked saloon with a hitching post that looked like it had once been a tree. A general store with shelves lined more with cobwebs than goods. An old man on a porch nodded at Elias, but avoided June's eyes. They stopped near the edge of town, beside a trough that hadn't seen water in weeks. Elias dismounted. June stayed on the horse a moment longer, staring at the peeling sign above the blacksmith's shop. Drew Iron & Co. Her mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly, like someone tasting iron. They took a room in the boarding house. One room, 2 cots, no questions. The woman who handed Elias the key looked June over once, her expression unreadable, and murmured something beneath her breath. Elias caught the word runaway. Inside the room, June stood near the window as if afraid to sit. Her fingers traced the glass pane. "There's a church here," she said quietly. "A real one." Elias didn't answer. He was folding a map on the small table, eyes scanning the street below. "They used to ring the bell on Sundays," she continued. "You could hear it from the vineyards." He turned toward her. "You've been here before." A pause. "Yes." She didn't explain further, and he didn't press. Outside, the town let out the long sigh of twilight, a horse snorting, a screen door creaking, a child crying somewhere behind boarded windows. They went to the saloon for a meal. The inside smelled of sweat and old whiskey. Men leaned into their glasses and away from their pasts. When June walked in, silence folded over the room like a blanket. Elias stepped in behind her, his presence anchoring the moment. They ate in the corner, a thin stew, hard bread. A woman approached their table. Elderly, dressed in black, a chain around her neck, holding a silver cross worn down to a whisper. "I know you," the woman said to June. June looked up, slow and calm. "You don't?" "I do," the woman insisted, voice sharpening. "You're the judge's wife." The room grew tighter. June said nothing. Elias set down his spoon and looked at the woman with something colder than warning. The woman faltered, then turned and walked away, muttering, "Disgrace." After that, no one else spoke to them. They left in silence. That night, June didn't sleep. She stood at the window again, watching the street as if expecting someone. Near dawn, Elias found the cot beside him empty. On the table, a note in her small, precise hand. "He doesn't forget. I thought he might. I was wrong. I'll end this before he finds you too." Beneath it, the comb he gave her. Clean, untangled. Elias stared at the note a long time. Then he folded it and put it in his coat. The trail she left was faint but deliberate. She wanted him to follow, just far enough behind, just slow enough to give her time. He rode through pale canyons where birds didn't sing, through a dry creek scattered with shoe prints. He passed an old sheep fence, bent and torn, and a rusted horseshoe nailed to a cottonwood tree. Her tracks turned south toward a ridge where black stones jutted out like broken teeth. At the top, a house appeared. Not a ruin, no. This place was preserved too well, as if death itself had been instructed to wait outside the gate. 2 stories. White paint yellowing from the sun, shutters shut tight. A fountain in the courtyard, cracked but still holding rainwater from the last storm. No lilies now, only weeds and moss. She stood before it, back straight, veil gone, hair pulled tight behind her neck like a woman bracing for surgery. Her hands were at her sides, fists clenched. A man stepped from the porch, tall, thin, silver hair oiled back, face like carved ivory, lips pale as paper. He wore a black coat and a ring shaped like a pomegranate, deep red, polished, set in gold. Judge Harlan Drew. He descended the steps slowly, cane clicking against the stone with each measured step. His voice, when it came, was honeyed with rot. "You came home?" June didn't move. "I expected you sooner," he said, stopping a few paces from her. "I would have sent someone, but I thought you deserved the dignity of choosing your own leash." She lifted her chin. "I didn't come for you." "No?" A smile touched his lips. "Then for what?" "To burn this house." He laughed softly. "You were always poetic." Elias stepped into view then, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The judge turned his head slowly, as if already aware. "And here he is," the judge said, smiling wider. "The vulture." Elias didn't respond. His hand rested near his belt, but not on his weapon. "You tracked her, I assume," the judge said, gaze drifting back to June. "You think she's yours now? You think you can ride off into some fantasy where this all disappears?" "She's not property," Elias said, voice flat. "No," said the judge, "she's memory." He stepped closer to June, and she didn't flinch. "Do you know what I gave up for you?" he said to her. "Do you think anyone will take you now? The name Drew means something. You wear it whether you want to or not." She raised her hand, and for a moment, Elias thought she might strike him. But instead she opened her palm. In it, the sparrow page from the hymnal. She held it out. "Take this," she said. "It's all that's left of you in me." The judge looked at the page, confused. Took it. Then June stepped back, not far, just a pace. The wind shifted. The judge moved his cane slightly, like an invitation or a feint. And Elias stepped forward, not fast, not loud, just enough to stand between them. Silence folded in around the three of them, thick as thunder. No shot was fired, not yet. But the weight of violence hung there, trembling like a string about to snap. The stillness before it broke was the kind only found in places that remember too much. Wind pressed against the White House with the caution of an old friend turned stranger. The weeds in the courtyard rustled like dry whispers, and the fountain, choked with algae and shards of sky, reflected three shapes caught in time: June, Elias, the judge. Harlan Drew folded the page June had offered, the hymnal scrap with the sparrow, tucked it into his coat without looking at it again. "I wonder," he said, almost to himself, "how far a woman must be pushed before she forgets the comfort of being owned." Elias remained silent, hands still at his sides, coat shifting in the rising wind. June's eyes stayed fixed on the judge, though a tremor moved through her jaw, brief and barely visible. She had taken a step back, but did not retreat. She stood now as someone who'd forgotten how to plead and had no interest in learning again. "I buried you once," the judge said to her. "Not in soil, no, in silk and rings. But you clawed back. That was a mistake." "Your mistake," June replied, voice even. The judge smiled faintly, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He looked at Elias. "You think you've saved her? You haven't. She's still marked. She still wears my name in the silence between her breaths." "No one wears your name," Elias said, "if they choose to leave it behind." Then maybe it's time someone reminded her what happens to broken vows. His hand moved, not toward Elias, but toward June. Not fast, not violent. Just a gesture too familiar, too old, too full of possession. Elias stepped forward. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't sharp. It was the way a shadow moves when a fire dies. A slow claiming of space. That was when the cane struck. It wasn't a weapon at first glance, silver-tipped, elegant, the kind held by men who speak with verdicts instead of fists. But the strike landed against Elias's ribs with force sharpened by precision. Not wild, not desperate, practiced. Elias staggered but did not fall. The second swing never came. June moved then, faster than memory, slower than fear. Her hand darted toward the judge's coat. She wasn't reaching for a weapon. She was reaching for the ring, the pomegranate. Fingers locked. A brief struggle, a brutal, intimate dance between two people who knew each other's silences too well. Elias recovered, one breath, two. Then his hand reached for the weapon, holstered not on his hip, but behind his back, a short-barreled rifle sawed down for the saddle. But the judge was already turning, already pulling something from beneath his coat. The crack of gunfire didn't ring loud. It was like a breath sucked in and never let go. Elias flinched, not from pain, but from instinct. The shot hadn't come from him. June stood, arm extended, holding a derringer no bigger than a child's toy. Smoke curled from its tip. Her hand shook. The judge took a step, then another. His fingers touched his chest, where the hymnal scrap had been placed. He fell forward, knees buckling, mouth still open, as if about to speak her name. No final words, no last breathful of regret or fury, just the sound of his body striking the dry stone and the wind rushing in to cover the silence. They didn't bury him. June sat on the front steps of the house, hands clasped between her knees, breathing slow and deliberate. Elias stood nearby, cleaning the small wound on his ribs with water from the canteen. It wasn't deep, just a warning. Smoke began to curl from the parlor window. June had lit the curtains with a coal from the courtyard stove. No ceremony, no vengeance, just a necessity. Inside the house, flames moved from room to room like a memory unspooling. "I told him I came to burn it," June said, watching the smoke rise. "He didn't believe me." "He believed too late," Elias muttered. They stayed until the roof groaned. The white paint peeled away like sunburnt skin. A flock of sparrows erupted from the attic rafters, startled into freedom. The judge's body lay crumpled near the fountain. Elias had dragged it there with quiet effort, not out of cruelty, but distance. When the fire reached the second floor, June stood and walked toward the edge of the garden. What had once been a row of lilies now choked with ash and thorns. She knelt and dug into the earth with bare fingers. She pulled something out, a small wooden box, lacquered red, the paint peeling. Inside, a ring, not the pomegranate, but a thin silver band with an engraving too worn to read. She held it up to the smoke light, then dropped it back into the hole and covered it with soil. "That belonged to my sister," she said. "He kept it like proof." Elias didn't ask what had happened to her. The past didn't need repeating in a place like this. They mounted the Mustang together. Two riders now, not one behind the other, but side by side. No need for words. The house behind them cracked, then folded in on itself in a slow, dusty collapse. June didn't look back. By nightfall, they had reached the edge of a ridge that overlooked the world like a forgotten god. Camp was made beneath the branches of a dead cottonwood. Firelight flickered across their faces, tired, windburnt, marked not by victory, but by the endurance of having lived through something. June sat with her back against the saddle, legs stretched toward the fire. Her dress now bore a long soot mark across one shoulder. She didn't brush it off. "You said once," she began, "that not everything ends cruel." Elias looked up. "I don't know if I believe you," she said. He didn't respond. "But I want to." He tossed another stick into the fire. Sparks rose and vanished into the ink of the sky. "You don't need to believe me," he said finally. "Just ride with me long enough to find out." June's lips parted, something close to a smile, not quite, but she said nothing more. The wind picked up again, cool, dry, moving across the desert like the hand of something older than memory. And far behind them, the house and the man who had built it were already ash. Winter came late to the borderlands, not snow but cold, hard and bone-deep, the kind that crawled under your skin and whispered of places you'd rather forget. The sun still rose, but with less fire, and the wind turned sharper, dragging grit across the land like a dull blade. Elias and June moved west, slower now with no fixed destination. Some mornings they rode in silence. Others they walked beside the horse, letting its breath plume into the pale air. The desert, once scorched and relentless, had softened, still vast, still empty, but quieter, as if the land had seen what they had done and chosen not to speak of it. The world around them grew thin, the towns sparser, the people quieter. A nod here, a glance there. June no longer hid her face. She wore the same dress, though its hem had been hemmed again, its sleeves cut for freedom. She moved like someone unfinished but steady. The judge's ghost had no more ground left to stand on. Elias said little. He always had. But something in the way he rode, less rigid, less ready, spoke of a shift. He still carried the rifle, still scanned every ridgeline, but he no longer rode as if expecting death from every shadow. He watched the sky more. He drank coffee slower. In a mining town called Bell's Hollow, they spent 2 nights in a dry, cold room above a shuttered chapel. June walked the edge of town, stopping to speak to a girl sweeping outside the bakery. She gave the girl the comb Elias had bought her, said nothing while handing it over. The girl, no older than 12, stared up at her with something between awe and fear. Then she smiled and curtsied. June smiled back, and that night she combed her hair with her fingers. On the last morning, they came across a field of white stones, not a cemetery, not quite. The stones were unmarked, arranged in patterns, circles, crosses, spirals, some broken halfway and left that way. Elias dismounted without a word. June followed, stepping through the frost-stiff grass. Between the stones, tufts of wild sage still clung to life, their scent sharp and bitter in the morning air. A raven sat atop the tallest rock, unmoving, watching. "They buried memories here," June said. Elias turned to her. She looked out at the field. Not people, just the pieces they couldn't carry anymore. He nodded, said nothing. She knelt near one of the stones, brushing a crust of frost from its surface. Then she stood and walked to a tree just beyond the edge of the field. A juniper, ancient and crooked, its bark stripped in long, spiraling wounds. From her satchel, she took the page, the sparrow hymn, burnt at one edge, folded twice. She pinned it to the tree with a small iron nail and stepped back. "He gave it to me once," she said, thinking it meant he cared. Elias stood beside her. "I kept it," she continued, "because it meant I'd survived him." They left it there, fluttering gently against the bark in the wind. That evening, they made camp beneath a low mesa where the stone curved inward, sheltering them from the cold. The fire was small, ringed with old ashes. The stars above had grown pale, washed out by winter's breath. Coyotes called somewhere far off, their voices thin and weary. June sat hunched near the flames, warming her hands. Her eyes reflected the glow like old glass. "If you hadn't come after me," she said, "I think I would have let him win." "You didn't need me to stop him," Elias replied. "No," she said, "but I needed someone to see me after." He looked at her long and steady. "I did." She nodded once. Then she said, "Do you think he loved me?" Elias didn't answer. She watched the fire crackle for a while longer. "It's strange," she said. "Sometimes I still wake up expecting him to be there. Not with fear, just expectation." Elias shifted slightly. "You get used to carrying weight, even after it's gone." She looked up. "Is that what you carry?" His eyes didn't move from the flames. Not anymore. She didn't ask what he had carried before. The question was enough. Before dawn, while the sky was still more ink than light, June rose and stepped away from the camp. Elias didn't stop her. He knew she wasn't leaving, just returning for a moment to herself. She stood at the edge of the cliff, arms folded against the cold, her silhouette dark against the cobalt horizon. Below her the land unrolled in silence, mesas, dry rivers, stretches of plain where buffalo no longer roamed. When the first light touched her face, it revealed no tears, just breath, steady and pale in the morning air. Her hands, bare, showed no rings. She came back to the camp and sat beside Elias as he poured 2 cups of coffee, black and bitter. They drank without speaking, the steam rising between them like an offering. When they finished, Elias rose and packed the gear. June saddled the horse, and then, with nothing else to tie them to the place, they rode west again. The final image was not of the house burning, or the judge falling, or even the sparrow pinned to the tree. It was 2 riders, silhouettes against a dying sun, crossing a plain where the wind turned cold but the sky remained wide and open. The Mustang's hooves stirred dust that caught in the light like gold. They did not speak. They did not look back. They simply rode into whatever silence waited beyond the hills, past the memory of violence, through the bones of the Old West, unclaimed, unbound, and slowly becoming something whole.